Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 22nd. We'll do about an hour of warm-up and then we'll jump into the main news section. Yeah, didn't really accomplish much over the past couple of days as far as redoing and modifying how the pre-show goes and when the pre-show airs. We'll scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart here to see what people are playing. But no, yeah, I feel like I've moved into kind of a vacation mode where I've just been watching a ton of streaming TV and doing almost nothing otherwise. And yeah, I'll probably run out of TV to watch even, because we are now back to the point where if new shows are coming to streaming or just coming out in general, they are doing it on a weekly basis, which, yeah, that shocked me and surprised me for no good reason, that The Boys only has 3 episodes, so I basically put it off for 3 weeks, and that let me watch 3 episodes, or more likely, it hasn't actually been 3 weeks and they just came out with like 2 episodes the first week and then another episode the next week. Yeah, that very first episode of the latest and I assume last season of The Boys really, I think, kind of hit home hard that losing characters has lost any emotional impact in The Boys in particular, and them trying to push it to some level of extremes, I think, has fallen out of being viable for The Boys in particular, because they have just like normalized violence and death so much. There is an argument certainly to be made to praise the amount of what looks like practical effects with CGI when you see people getting blown up into clouds of bloody mist or sliced in half and things like that, but even that is easy to overlook, because it's just like we've seen this all before. For a more shocking series, I feel like there is probably a slightly smaller amount of time you can stick with a shocking amount of series, or you try to do one big shock right at the end of a series and do that old school cliffhanger type thought, just at the end of each season. But then if you do a cliffhanger, you don't really resolve a season particularly well, and so you run into problems that way. You kind of cannot do both. I'm trying to find Pragmata here. Here it is, way down in the 43rd section. Yeah. I am hearing from just online that there are people who are probably just clickbaiting, complaining about aspects of Pragmata, seemingly for mostly non-legitimate reasons, and maybe Capcom is overly reacting to these non-legitimate, nobody's complaining about Pragmata. But then again, that might all just be a red flag operation by the advertising company promoting Pragmata for Capcom, and that they are literally just trying to stir up more controversy. When, best as I can tell, the most controversial thing you can legitimately say about Pragmata is it looks like it's a pretty boring game. And yeah, there doesn't seem to be anything really else that you could be upset with there. And not legitimately. And yeah, I feel like it probably is a case that the internet is just increasingly desperate to have some kind of controversy, whether it's in gaming or somewhere else, that is not just a United States politics controversy, and just get people's attention on anything and everything other than that. or catch back people who may have just logged off at this point for the most part and are not online following Twitter. Like Twitter in particular, yeah, we're still calling it Twitter, but it's X, and that's pretty dead. And so there really isn't a super centralized even discourse. Probably fewer and fewer people going to Reddit, probably more and more bots going to Reddit. So yeah, a global central place for discourse, I think, maybe disappearing if it ever did really exist. So yeah, the first 3 episodes of The Boys, to get back to what I was watching, not really that impressive. I think they, first of all, they pretty obviously have turned too many characters into just strawman characters a little too much. I mean, they inherently always were, but Homelander in particular is extremely far from a what if it was Superman but he was evil archetype that was the original feeling of the premise in the first season, into now being strawmans for several characters, but mostly I think the idea is Trump. Although you might make a good argument that maybe he's a better strawman for J.D. Vance. But yeah, the show really in 3 episodes is not doing or saying anything. And honestly, if I tried to rethink the previous seasons of The Boys, I don't think they really said or do anything either. It definitely feels like a show that is a roller coaster show, where week to week you just want the extreme ridiculousness of it, if you can handle it, which a lot of people can't. And then that's it, just an extreme dopamine rush when you are coming down the roller coaster, and then you forget about the experience 5 minutes later. Which, speaking of forgetting things 5 minutes later, I did finish watching Supernatural, which, yeah, Supernatural ends its big fight with capital G God in 2, maybe 3 episodes, and then they have the final episode is an epitaph episode, and even in that epitaph episode they're still just bringing back characters and answering questions and fan service things, and that's pretty much all of season 15 is just fan service things. Let's go on the forums of the time and answer any questions that they might have, and leave no plot holes or dangling threads of things going unexplained. But yeah, they defeat capital G God, replace him with the character Jack, who then disappears and says he's going to be the new hands-off God. And it's not particularly an impressive way in which it's done, because they've been teasing all these other plots and schemes as to how they would actually accomplish that, and then they kind of just pull a solution out of their butt at the end. Yeah. And then you get the epitaph episode, which feels extremely untrue to the series, in that you have Sam and Dean actually getting along and liking each other out of nowhere, when they had been fighting basically the episode before. They'd been fighting the entire 15 seasons straight. Certainly, if I was going to make a fantasy remake on that aspect, I would think very hard about having them be on the same page and working together a lot more often than they were. Like, you can literally just pick any random episode of Supernatural and Sam and Dean will be fighting about something. Yeah. And yeah, there's not really a lot to say there. Otherwise, it's amazing how disappointing the ending of a series is, that it power creep to the point where they're killing God. And certainly that's like very far away from finding a god level character in like Dragon Ball Z Kai or something like that, where at least they know how to get their power creep to go up and up and up. Oh yeah, I guess if I just think of it off the top of my head right now, as we're looking at the most wishlisted games, a Kamea, not a Kamehameha, what is it called? A World Bomb? Spirit Bomb? A Spirit Bomb would have been a more impactful way to defeat God in Supernatural. They have bombs where they collect souls of ghosts, yes, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Dragon Ball Z, where Goku gets all of the energy from all of the people on the planet Earth. So they all stick their hands up and they all are telepathically hearing him beg for energy, and they're all focusing their ki energy, their chi energy, into one giant ball of energy spirit bomb that Goku throws at, I think it's Frieza. Yeah. But yeah, that would have been a more interesting way to defeat God in Supernatural, to just rip that off. Particularly since God kills like all the humans on the planet Earth. Just a few episodes earlier, he literally leaves Sam and Dean alone on Earth to have nobody to save, to have nothing to do, to try and torment them. Yeah. But yeah, that didn't happen, obviously. It would have been more impactful. That would have been a great way for the people, all the people that Sam and Dean supposedly saved throughout the 15 seasons, to come back if they appeared and combined their energy. If all the people who were saved, or all the souls that were sent to heaven, combined and worked together. But yeah, they made a whole thing with the new Grim Reaper doing a heel turn and being the bad guy, and they literally only had a couple of episodes to deal with that. So even at the end of Supernatural, it definitely felt like there was at least two writers that were just arguing with each other as far as what is the direction, what is the plot here going through, who do we want the real bad guy to be. There is a huge problem in the lack of an ensemble cast in Supernatural 2, and as weird as it might be, if you were going to make a fantasy remake of Supernatural, you definitely would want to have much more of an ensemble cast. Let's run some general numbers. Like, they're basically, at best, you could be generous and say there are 4 main characters at any one time that are part of the ensemble cast of Supernatural, and 2 out of the 4 characters often will swap in and swap out. So it's not always Jack and Castiel with Sam and Dean. Sometimes it's Benny with Dean. Sometimes it's Crowley with Dean. Yeah. Sometimes it's Ruby, even with Sam. So there's just all kinds of different combinations for a 4-character ensemble. Whereas you compare that to Babylon 5, there was basically 11 ensemble cast members, which let them have an A plot, a B plot, and often a C plot going on in a single episode, happening between 2, maybe 3 people in a group at one time. And so you never really had any actor have to spend too much time with any other actor so they wouldn't get too frustrated with each other, just as coworkers tend to get frustrated with each other. And you could certainly mix it up. But yeah, 11 ensemble actors in Babylon 5. If we think about the boys, they're going to have, I would say, close to 11. There's at least 8 characters, but yeah, you are again approaching 10 or 11 ensemble characters between the good guys and the bad guys in the boys, whose story you're following pretty consistently around the place. And the other thing I spent a lot of time watching here, well, I also watched an episode of Crapopolis, and I guess that has an ensemble cast of maybe 5 characters, main characters, but then there's probably a 6th and 7th extra character, and that's a cartoon that's, I think, only 30 minutes long, and that works pretty well. But frankly, they could do with a couple more characters in Crapopolis. And then I started watching another cartoon on Prime Video called Kevin, which is this cat that his owners, anthropomorphic talking standing on 2 legs cat, his owners break up, and instead of choosing to go with the one owner that they wanted the cat to go with, he instead chooses to just become a adoption shelter cat and moves in with this adoption shelter of a whole bunch of other crazy neurotic cats. In this comedic cartoon world, it's a Adult Swim style comedy, and that it's adult in nature, I guess, and that's pretty much the only thing that makes Adult Swim style a style. There's just, again, I would say 8 cats, but then there's 3 humans that would be part of the main ensemble cast too. Not that they all show up in the same episode, but that's not really what an ensemble cast means, in my mind. Is that they have to be in every single episode of a season. But yeah, it is back to about 11 characters. What's interesting about Kevin too is that one of the cats, who's probably one of the dirtiest cats, is a feral cat called is it Cotton Candy or something? Sugar Plum, something like that, is voiced by, yeah, I think not Oprah Winfrey, the other, the stand-up comedian, not that is of African American descent and is pretty old and has been canceled a couple of times. Now I can't remember her name. She played Guinan in Star Trek The Next Generation too. What's funny, as I try to think of her name, is I feel like the way the titles go, because of SAG-AFTRA rules, would be that her name would be the first name showed in the credits of Star Trek The Next Generation and Kevin. And to get away with that, they have this system where they can apply for a exemption per show and have it at the end where it says and Whoopi Goldberg. That's her name, yeah. Whoopi Goldberg, I imagine, is pretty old now and probably not very camera ready, to put it nicely. So her voice acting a cat in an animated cartoon probably is a great way for her to keep working to maintain SAG-AFTRA healthcare. But yeah, there's some weirdness around that too. Let's see. Somebody's ringing my doorbell. I have no idea who it is though. group of 3 random persons, one on a Segway on my yard. That's weird. Yeah. Sometimes I get some really weird people. Probably door-to-door proselytizers of some sort. If they're not selling something, they're probably selling religion. So yeah, I kind of like Kevin. It is just yet another one of those kind of Family Guy type shows where even at the beginning of the first season, you can kind of feel that it's just going to find a somewhat comfortable pattern and stick with it. It is pretty extremely dirty in its jokes, probably more than it really needs to be. And it does create a weird world where the humans literally just talk to the animals and the animals talk back. And they don't just mimic, they have intelligence and are speaking back to them. So it does just create this weird world, which then they take to a very dirty level, and that humans are just openly committing acts of bestiality with the animals who are into it. Yeah. So yeah, I think it'll be a fine series that probably would get canceled. It does. I think it's a Prime original, and it's probably too dirty because of that. Inherently, Prime, I think, is thinking that they are going to be the new HBO, where the most extreme things happen because of The Boys and Invincible, and I think that is probably a stupid direction for a Prime Video to try to go into. Yeah. If I was in charge of Prime Video, I would be greenlighting more projects that were mid-level of offensiveness or even family friendly and for kids, and just try to be the general place where you can go to see videos, and probably have a level of kids content for kids accounts, and also just filtering even for adults accounts, because yeah, Prime Video is, in my mind, supposed to be an echo of Amazon Prime, and Amazon Prime's general idea is that they want everybody shopping there. Which, yeah, sure, you can get adult marital aids, to put it in an old-fashioned term, on Amazon.com, but you won't see those advertised to you unless you start shopping for them, just because of the way they've got their algorithms. You're not going to see a front page deal for one, more than likely ever. Yeah. Kevin 2, as it's a terrible name. It probably needed to be Kevin the Cat or something like that. Doesn't really do anything, and I watched the entire first season. It's just like, okay, I watched that. I'll probably forget it in a week. It was alright, but not something great enough that I would ever imagine I would go back and watch it a second time. Yeah. So yeah, there has been just a ton of watching streaming. I've also had a nightmare of a time as I'm working on finishing up a slideshow project of trying to find an Android app that will rename files based on a search and replace in such a way that it would let me take files and put them into subfolders. I think a big part of the problem there is certainly just Android's security as far as which folder you can act on and how you're going to work in that folder really sucks now. Google has put way too much security in there and put no way to disable those security protections. pretending like there was just like this really huge problem of Android apps going into your files and reading files from like a downloads folder, or deleting files from a downloads folder, which I don't think that ever really happened. And yeah, that's kind of the problem with a lot of the security enhanced Linux options that you can set up on some versions of Linux, is that the general idea of every single file, every single folder having special unique security requirements, and isolating apps to only being able to access their own data so that they're more sandboxed in the past has been pretty bad. But I would say in most Linuxes, you have a home folder, and whatever's in the home folder is usually by default accessible to any process in the system. And that's just fine for most people, because if you put something in your home folder or a subfolder of your home folder, like your downloads folder, that's not particularly important data that you would care about. But Android doesn't really do that. They don't let you, a lot of older apps, access files at all that haven't been updated. And even if it has been updated, they very much don't let you act on the downloads folder specifically and have to create your own new folder that was created by that specific app. Inherently, I'm suffering here because I didn't test anything or plan anything particularly well. Had I downloaded the 12,000 photos for the slideshow in a different way, or formatted them in a different way when I was downloading them, as far as they were being downloaded as tar archives, if I had just extracted the tar archives to their own separate subfolder, I wouldn't have to be trying to do what I'm doing now. And that would have been the smart move, is to have potentially maybe even 180 subfolders that would have had potentially 20 to 60 photos in each subfolder, uploaded all of that to Google Photos, then added each folder as its own album. Still, that's going to be a time-intensive process. And then add all of the files to one big album separately after the fact in Google Photos. I was certainly thinking of just the one big folder final step, without thinking about the potential middle steps. So yeah, inherently I'm going to probably be an expert at making slideshows using Google Photos right about the time that I have no more possible slideshows that I can think of making. But yeah, it is really a side project anyways, so it's really something I just want to get done with and move on. Did a little bit of moving around and cleaning and decluttering today, and in that I started to move my partially built computer from one room to the other. This is in a probably vain attempt to hope that the lighting is just better in another room and the feng shui might be better in another room, to further push me to actually finish putting the computer together. And even when I get the hardware going, there's still a whole software issue there that is going to have to be addressed. But yeah, it's probably a project I should start. I should finish and just be done with it. But yeah, we shall see how far I really move with any of that. I did have, I guess you might call it a nightmare, but I would really just call it a dream, where I woke up this morning and a full-on, completely different Windows 11 interface was happening on my computer when I turned it on. didn't really happen, but yeah, it's going to eventually happen. Yeah, we can say the normal thing, still wasting way too much time doing Sudoku variations from cracking the cryptic and failing at those. Wasting a bunch of time watching how I failed on those and probably not learning too much. Still playing Memento Mori, making bits and pieces of progress there. Not a ton of progress by any means. And then the Pokemon TCG Pocket. I'm trying to finish all of that as far as having all of the cards available, which I may have hit a struggle point there where I don't quite have enough opportunity to have all the cards, but I could almost certainly get it all in trading eventually. And I really don't feel like I'll probably accomplish anything more in the next few days. Like maybe Monday next week is a good time to just target to get back to work and try harder, or maybe Saturday and Sunday might be a good targeted time too. Now every time I think of Saturday, I'm thinking about the potential of a movie club, which, yeah, there's still some things that I would need to do to get that going on a virtual movie setup, and then the in-person private viewings are going to be something probably from a year from now or longer. But then with that, I also have to fully admit that over the past couple days, I haven't watched any movies at all. I've been catching up on a whole bunch of TV shows, and while that can add something to potentially a movie club, not too much. Yeah, I watched a couple episodes of the latest season on Hulu of Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, which are really just has the main protagonist going on a date, and they aren't in the dungeon and they aren't fighting any monsters or anything like that. So far that season isn't really going into the sci-fi aspects. Yeah, I had an episode of Hoarders playing in the background, didn't actually watch that, though I wasn't paying attention to it. That's where I could perhaps bring back my what I'm watching weekly Yay Booze type articles on. I assume I'm going to just do the movie group via a movie forum on my Discord. Like, it seems silly to like not just have it be under the Rydo branding and in the Rydo Discord. But yeah, if I am going to sit through a movie, I am going to have to do that more consistently. But I also kind of want some consensus too. It gets really ridiculous if I'm just doing virtual movie viewings when I'm picking the movie that I'm going to watch on or before a Saturday, and then I'm jumping into a discussion thread after the movie to possibly discuss it with anyone else who actually shows up and watches it. It's a little too controlling. I'm already fairly controlling. I discussed my mini movie gauntlet with another person that I absolutely knew wouldn't have passed the challenge of the mini movie gauntlet and would not be the right type of person I would want in my movie club. Which a lot of the things that I'd like to watch are probably 90s movies, and apparently the kids these days are calling that unk slop, just adding the word slop to anything. Obviously I haven't gotten back to playing any actual video games lately. I'm really falling away from actually being a video gamer for the past month or so. Which that's happened in the past too, is that I just kind of lost momentum and interest for playing video games for a while. Of course, in the past, it was also because I was working an extremely time-demanding job. It's not really the case now. Although all the cleaning and decluttering is actually very energy and time-demanding. But yeah, I suppose the 90s were very much the foundational era of my life. Like, I was just in the right time to start developing some nostalgia when the 90s were going on. But yeah, I imagine I would also want to just look at what new movies are coming to streaming services, and mostly that's going to be Prime Video for me, and new movies that come out that are interesting would be a good setup for something to watch too on the movie group. Oh, there is an interesting article. I don't know if we covered it in the last stream, but I want to talk about Silent Hill F too. So I believe it was the director came out and said just publicly in an interview that he was not qualified to write stories about women, and that he just completely handed over his directorial responsibilities to women in general. Like, he told all the developers to ask their sisters, their wives, their daughters, their friends who are female, and to get their perspective and their story while making Silent Hill F, which might explain something about why Silent Hill F is only 80% positive overall. It might explain a little bit of the weirdness just in general around Silent Hill F. But let's say it actually explains nothing at all, and the game would have been exactly the same had they not been given that direction and just asked for input. It's still a terrible, terrible thing to say out loud and do out loud. Art is supposed to be the vision of the artist. You can't collaborate to make good art in almost every example. I don't know of any hugely successful collaboration that is actually advertised as a collaboration. Sure, maybe the Sistine Chapel was painted by many apprentices and interns, but only one person put their name on the project and was the person in charge of establishing the vision. But yeah, it also weirdly is saying that none of those female people were qualified or to be paid or hired to do the job of making Silent Hill F, that they couldn't find in Japan a single female director who had a female perspective that wanted to make a horror game. This may very well be a case of a Japanese director saying a bunch of BS that wasn't really true, just because they think it sounds good and it might gain them some favor. But yeah, it is not a great thing to say out loud that a director handed over his job, his tasks, to create a vision for a game, and then asked a whole bunch of random, unnamed, uncredited females for their experience. It does certainly scream like a Western SJW type statement, or a Japanese person trying to echo a Western SJW type statement to say, as a Asian male, I'm not qualified to write a female experience. Which I don't really buy into limiting artists the ability to write any stories they want. I think there are plenty of good artists out there who have depicted female and male characters and even non-gendered characters just fine. I guess we could take it to an extreme and say that, like, Disney didn't have to be a mouse to animate a mouse, or the animators at Disney did not have to be mice to animate a mice. But yeah, and almost certainly there were no female animators in the room making Cinderella as far as a Disney movie, or I would bet there's probably a significantly few amount of animators who have been female who have animated any of the Disney princess movies. Even the most recent ones, I bet, barely have any female animators out there. Come to think of it. Yeah. Even if it wasn't a gender issue, there should have been one strong artistic direction and lead for Silent Hill F to tell a more resonant story that people enjoyed and talked about a lot more. Because, yeah, people barely talked about Silent Hill F, and they barely talked about the story, and almost never in a hugely positive way. For the Silent Hill game, it definitely got very little reviews. And you can see that the 24-hour peak now, just a few months later, is 542 people, although it is a single-player game, so that doesn't really matter too much. Almost certainly you could have brought in a Japanese author. I'm sure there's at least a few female Japanese authors who could have been the figurehead and the inspiration as a creative consultant if they were going to do something like that, and credit that famous Japanese author as a creative consultant, or even if they had just brought in the wife of the director and credited her as a creative consultant. That would have been better, to have one person who actually gets credit. But yeah. It is always a shame when your game is only a few months out and the only news coming out about it, if you're getting any news, is just interviews that only slightly explain why the reception wasn't particularly great. Oh, and yeah, speaking of movies, I want to mention this. Ninja Scroll on Blu-ray is like $10 on Amazon Prime, as far as 90s anime movies go. I already have it on DVD, but I figured for $10 I'll grab the Blu-ray version too. There is usually pretty big differences between a DVD and a Blu-ray release if they've been released over a course of years, particularly in anime. Things change hands, or companies change their names. The encoding process might be better. You might get a better transfer for an animated thing way more than a live action thing. Whereas I would never really make the decision to rebuy a live action movie, because I just doubt that too much is going to be different from a DVD version versus a Blu-ray versus a 4K version of any live action movie to make it really worth it. I am making some exceptions there for really dark movies, so like 7 and 4K makes sense, just because it would be really dark. But yeah, and a 90s movie that was pretty grainy and ugly to start with is still going to be pretty grainy and ugly on Blu-ray, and pretty grainy and ugly in 4K, and most of those movies are not worth really owning it. That is one thing that I think the next generation of people, as they start to go back to physical media and possibly running their own home servers, is they're going to start to have this real balance between, do I want an MP4 that of this movie that takes up less space, versus do I want a 4K disc of this that would take up way more space, like 22 gigabytes potentially, versus half a gigabyte on an MP4. And yeah, it's going to just come down to, is this a top tier movie that I would want to watch in my theater and actually care about it, or is this a movie that I would want in my collection to watch when I have nothing else to watch? And a lot of that was what streaming was too. Streaming was the compromised video quality that is alright, but it's not going to be as good as physical media, but it was going to be easy to access. Of course, now with ads and Prime Video, with things going away, with algorithm and search fatigue, it's never really the case that streaming services offer that setup. Particularly when you get to like really old shows, there's not going to be any difference between a Three Stooges episode on DVD versus Blu-ray versus 4K. That film has almost certainly been lost to time at this point. A lot of movie films have just been burnt, and the masters are missing completely. Yeah, he just came out with a Tom and Jerry Golden Era anthology Blu-ray, and even in that, I think there's 3 or 4 episodes that are only in mediocre quality because of fires burning the master film prints. Yeah. And I assume they were ash canning the original cells after scanning them, or not scanning them as much as projecting them onto the film masters. Yeah, so there's probably no way to recover the animation by rescanning the cells in most cases. Yeah, even nowadays, if you were doing in-hand animation, I imagine they would be selling off cells like crazy and not keeping the drawings, if there was drawings. So yeah, I talked about earlier the Twitter weirdos, for lack of a better term, complaining on Pragmata, and when you look at Steam and see it's 96% positive, you see the reality of the situation. 38,796 people playing, if I can read the number right, a single player game. Yeah, one of the tweets in particular, apparently they changed the mesh where you can't modify the camera to look under this big puffy jacket of Diana. At some point she was apparently in her original form wearing like black spats pants. Now they've just changed it into kind of like a puffy mesh, which I don't think that really matters. Diana is clearly not a fan service character and not supposed to be a fan service character. But yeah, then another weirdo was complaining that the facial structure of Diana here is too adult for a robotic child, and that it should be less like jawline and less overall mature features and more just puffy, fat, baby fat type features. Again, I think she looks fine, and she's a robot, so what does it matter? And then I think, yeah, I mean, that does look like a child to me. If you want to complain about faces, complain about the fact that this guy's face is just in this armor almost always. And that is perhaps highlighting Capcom's engine's weakness here, is that they can animate one person with hair on the screen at one time, it seems. Then you're down to robot faces that are considerably less detailed. And then there's just like a general random people saying it's a pedophile game, and I don't see that at all. Like, that's pretty ridiculous in my, I would say. As far as I know, there isn't even a Japanese like skinships bathing type thing in Pragmata. I would severely believe that that is true, that there isn't any kind of, oh, one of them gets in a onsen spa type scenario. I bet there's never a wink and a nod in Pragmata where Diana is treated as an object of desire, whereas other anime games might do that, or they might at least more correlate cuteness with being provocative. But yeah, I would imagine this game in particular has been tested over and over again to not create any controversy, really. Compared to something like Stellar Blade, which there is really no comparison at all. Two incredibly different types of games. There is certainly a more important story, I think, to be had around how long this game has been in development, and it seems like it's been rebooted 3 times, or at least 2 times. And it is kind of crazy that you still get a game that looks pretty simplistic and pretty boring, visually at least, after all those reboots. They definitely were trying to do something very different with this game. Or maybe they weren't trying to do something very different and just ended up doing something very different, because it would make a lot of sense to me if the hacking boss fight stuff happened very much less often, and then there was just supposed to be a second or maybe even a third gameplay mechanic that they had to leave on the cutting room floor. Because yeah, if Pragmata was instead a Metroidvania game where you're playing as the guy and Diana disappears and reappears only for the boss fights, that would kind of make some more sense. And yeah, if there was just maybe a lot more story elements and investigation going on too. Because I'm really getting the feeling that Pragmata in an alternate universe could have been a Bioshock type game where you're the big daddy character and she's the little sister, which obviously there's some inspiration there, and that you would have been stuck on this Rapture-like city trying to figure out what was going on, even though Bioshock kind of did that in Bioshock 2. You could certainly put a sci-fi spin on it and do it again. Vampire Crawlers, despite my slight concerns, has proven to be overwhelmingly positive. I was certainly a little concerned about the idea of a dungeon crawler, but It seems like it doesn't matter. My concerns were not well confirmed with over 2,000 reviews and 98% positivity. I can put that on the wish list and admit I was wrong. And my concerns were not needed. Still not seeing any Steam Decks refurbs, at least, available. At some point, we should start to think about just looking at the non-refurbed version, factory new versions, see what the stock is there. I did hear a rumor, and I would chalk this up very much in the rumor category, that Valve is going to be receiving a hardware shipment of probably the new controllers in the next couple of weeks. So theoretically, it is possible that the Steam Machine will start to get announced and start being able to be at least pre-ordered in the next couple of weeks, but it might just be that the controllers are available in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, we can see even the new units are out of stock. So yeah, you really are in a bind right now if you were looking for something to get into PC gaming. I don't know what the stock really is as far as finding used Steam Decks at GameStop or something like that is, but yeah. Now is a pretty bad time to get into gaming. Fortunately, there isn't a real reason why you would be getting into gaming right about now either. Of course, games might sell a few systems, but I would say seasonality would be more of a factor as to why people would get into PC gaming. Yeah. And I think I talked about my smart birdhouse a long time ago. Still there, still working. Still has yet to encourage a single bird to go to it, though. Probably because I didn't put the right bird seed in it, but yeah, that is something that I need to get back to and work on, is to probably scrape out all the dehydrated fly larvae that I put in there, trying to attract a very specific type of carnivorous bird, and put just regular bird seed and just use it like a regular bird feeder. It literally has not seen a single bird, and it's been up for months. We're not quite yet to the point where birds should be showing up, but we should have seen one. I have seen a few insects fly in front of it, and I've seen my lawnmower mow the backyard with it. So as an extra security camera, it works, but it would be ideal if it actually worked as a bird feeder too. Yeah. And I guess that is more than enough warm up here. I do feel like today, after I accidentally dropped a bunch of crackers on the floor, the bag exploded on me when I opened it. I do kind of feel like today I'm a little bit off. And weirdly, that might just mean I'm kind of neutral. And so I don't feel exhaustedly tired, but I also don't think I'm ever going to feel super pumped and energized and high energy. I wouldn't be surprised if I never feel that again, if I ever felt it in the first place. I'm still noticing that a lot of the things I order on Amazon are getting rescheduled. That shipping things is less effective and efficient as it once was. They have these experimental things that they're doing now with having drones just drop packages in your yard. They've been doing that and experimenting with that for a while, and that is pretty crazy. I don't think anything I would ever order I'd be happy with it being dropped by a drone in my yard. And the bigger question, I guess, then comes to, is that how things are going to start getting shipped from the warehouses? Because yeah, I could see a whole scenario go on where they figure out a way to get a drone to carry just enough stuff where they can fire a trucker and not have an 18-wheeler move things from one warehouse to another, and instead just have a drone fly from one warehouse rooftop to another. I don't think we're at that point though. Like, these drones, even though they're huge, can't really carry that much. And if you really had a plane big enough to carry that much as far as what an 18-wheeler could, it would be so huge it would need a flight and a pilot license, almost certainly, and a pilot. So it's probably more expensive, to cost more fuel, unless you can figure out a way for drones to be 100% solar and go for miles on miles. Which that would be the other thing, certainly, is if you had a whole bunch of really medium-sized drones, and they're not going to be small drones, flying on solar alone, then maybe you would just have a fleet of them moving things back and forth. Yeah, I think that's more sci-fi than reality at this point, and I am pretty much just rambling here. Alright, well, let's go through the Video Games Chronicle news and see what's happened in the past couple days. The Echo the Dolphin Complete has been announced, containing the first 2 games and a new contemporary game. The collection's development is being led by Echo's creator, Ed Anunzieta? Zieda? I don't know how to really pronounce that. I feel like this was announced a while ago, though, that there was at least a desire to make a new Echo the Dolphin game, and that the games were going to be re-released. Maybe this complete version is just taking already released re-releases and putting them in one package with a new contemporary game. Nobody ever really got that far, or at least most players didn't get that far with Echo the Dolphin, to realize how just crazy and sci-fi and alien involving Echo the Dolphin is. So it'll be questionable as far as whether people's nostalgia will line up with what Echo the Dolphin's original games were, and whether they would want whether they'd want a contemporary game of Echo the Dolphin. Inherently, it's pretty obvious to mention that there have not been any other games, really, where you play as a dolphin swimming around in the ocean, so certainly didn't become a genre in itself. This is a lawsuit apparently was preventing a lot of Echo the Dolphin stuff from going on up until 2016. Sega. Nintendo has been sued by players who say they should get any tariff refunds received by the US government. Nintendo raised the price of some Switch 2 accessories due to Trump's widespread tariffs. Inherently, this is the first of what is probably going to be many lawsuits from consumers. well, the Supreme Court in the United States struck down the tariffs and said Trump didn't have the legal authority to apply these tariffs. They set up no system for how refunds are really going to go. So big companies like Amazon, for example, are suing the government to get the money back, and inherently if they win those lawsuits, they're going to get the money and just put it in their pockets. They really have no legal reason, at least at this moment, that they have to give it to the consumers, since they raised the prices there. And in particular, many of these companies like Nintendo may have raised the prices and blamed tariffs, but they may not have effectively made a line item in the bill that said tariff. And so if they just raised the prices and didn't say tariffs, they may not have created enough evidence to be used against them for consumers to come back and sue. And yeah, again, if Amazon wins their lawsuit and gets the money for tariffs back, then its consumers would have to sue Amazon to get the money back, because it really was the consumers who were paying this tax. Yeah. And so yeah, it's a huge nightmare, and it's a nightmare that's almost certainly going to to take a long time to ever settle, if it ever does get settled. The quote here is, unless restrained by the court, Nintendo stands to recover the same tariff payments twice, one from consumers through higher prices, and again from the federal government through tariff refunds, including interest paid by the government on those refunds. Interest paid would be money coming out of the general funds of the government that are funded by people's taxes. So even if these consumers don't get their money back, Nintendo and companies are going to be getting money that was the consumers, the citizens of the United States, in the form of interest repaid on top of raising their prices. This is perhaps one of the most recent and great examples of the little man always gets screwed, and the 1%, the rich people, always having schemes and lawyers to figure out a way to make sure that they don't lose any profits. Yeah. And this might very well be a case where the courts need to figure out a better system for this to go and for this to happen. Otherwise, you're just disenfranchising the small people once again, which is what they always tend to do in capitalist societies, and frankly non-capitalist societies too. Let's see. Miyamoto says he was surprised the Mario Galaxy movie reviews were even harsher than the first. Mario creator thought the second movie's reception would be different. I heard that Donkey Kong wasn't in Mario Galaxy, but I guess this is actually a picture from the first movie, Super Mario Bros. Movie, and he definitely was in that one. Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, if you're going to say anything other than I'm satisfied with the movie and I'm happy with the movie, saying you're surprised by harsh reviews isn't too extreme of a response. I feel like, once again, people online are just desperate for any kind of conflict and controversy, and I think the audience for the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which is kids, are more than happy with the movie. That would be where I would leave it. Notoriously, I will also point out, I kind of hated the first Mario movie, and whenever I get around to watching the Mario Galaxy movie, I plan on probably hating that one too, and just fully recognize that I am not the target audience for the movie, and that the movies can easily be their own thing that have nothing to do with my nostalgic feelings around Mario. The critic score is 43%, but it is worth pointing out that the Rotten Tomatoes system is basically just a thumbs up, thumbs down system. I think is how it works. So the critics either put a thumbs up or a thumbs down for the movie, and then however many people have a thumbs up in percentages is your score. So 43% of critics did a thumbs up, and we assume the remainder did a thumbs down, which still is bad, but it doesn't inherently mean the same as on average critics are reviewing the movie at 43% out of 100. Yeah. Although that system might counter the 7 out of 10 problem, where you would just have tons of critics reviewing the movie as 7 out of 10, and every movie is 7 out of 10. But yeah, who are these critics? Why should you listen to them? All great questions I can't answer. The audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, in contrast, is 89%. So yeah, critics don't really matter around kids' movie. They never really did. And frankly, critics don't really matter around niche movies in general, horror movies, things like that. Their opinions not that helpful. Honestly, I'm not sure their opinions are that helpful ever. Like even Siskel and Ebert's reviews of a lot of movies that are now universally beloved were pretty off. So I don't know if there's really a voice out there that I trust. Maybe Red Letter Media, which that's kind of crazy to even trust them as far as movie reviews go, but that would be the only person or group of people who I know their voice, and I know where they're coming from, and I know where their opinions are likely going to align with my opinions. But yeah, I don't even think in that case though I would have Red Letter Media convince me to watch or to not watch a movie anyways. Yeah. Nowadays in particular, I just don't think you need critics for movies. There's far too few movies that you would ever even consider watching that you should go out of your way to have a critic potentially convince you not just to give it a try. The movies are fairly disposable. Video game critics, since I am one of those, I would argue are in a very different spot. There's way more games coming out than movies every day on Steam, and critics can certainly help you get through a lot of garbage to find games that are actually good. Whereas when you go to the movie theater, there's going to be 5, maybe 6 movies. It's an easy decision to pick which one you're going to watch and watch it. You just don't need a critic for such a small subset of things. Yeah, and I kind of had hoped that my movie group idea had started a little bit better, and I would have gone and seen the Mario Galaxy movie in theaters. That would have been expensive, certainly, but yeah, it's probably not going to happen. It depends on whether people actually get on board. I inherently have no desire to show up at a theater and just say, hey, I'm going to be at this theater at this time, and be the only person there and just watching a movie in a movie theater by myself, when I basically would be setting myself up to being stood up on a date or the equivalent of it. Not really a date, but it would be that same feeling. And frankly, I am a fairly old person, so an old dude going to watch a Mario movie by themselves might feel awkward, if not raise some red flags. So yeah, had I gotten even one person to commit to a date and time to watch the movie with me, yeah, I basically want at least one movie buddy to watch a movie, sit in the theater with me. I would go, but I'm not gonna do it all by myself. I think that's fairly reasonable too. That might be something that changes in the future, is that we might just have more forms of entertainment that encourage and engage with lonely individual people. Not to say that I'm inherently lonely, but I'm often individual. But yeah, almost every social activity is a social activity. Going out to a restaurant, to a movie, even shopping in a lot of cases. Just very weird to do it, or it feels very awkward in the United States to do it solo. Yeah. Vampire Survivors developer is working on over 15 projects, including IP collaborations. Ponsol is opening a studio in Italy and Japan, or studios in Italy and Japan. I suppose it could be multiple ones. This feels like this is one of those cases where they're going very big, very fast, and I am not sure if that is a smart move. But yeah, it may very well be that they are involved in 15 projects, but 12 of them really are just licensing out the survivor's name. That could be the case. I don't know what this screenshot is. I mean, I played Vampire Survivors, and I don't recognize this character. Maybe it's a DLC character I didn't play? They would add new characters? But yeah. This symbol is new, and these ghosts are new, and this location is new. Whatever these brown things are. I can't even make out what those are supposed to be, if they're supposed to be anything. Or new. And then these things, these bluish things, new. And this, I imagine, is an attack that's new. The light blue here. Maybe the rays of light. Yeah. 15 projects, not 15 full new games. That makes more sense because you could easily have several games with several DLC and just update elements. Which I guess that makes a lot more sense. Than completely separate games. Let's see. Miyamoto says he wants Peach's origin story in the Super Mario Galaxy movie to remain canon in future games. One of the film's biggest surprises that now appears to be part of the game's lore going forward. Okay, well, I have not spoiled myself in the Mario Galaxy movie, so I knew nothing of Peach's origin story. I do vaguely recall in the past, though, that Miyamoto said he really didn't want to create an origin story for Peach or really any of the characters, because it's not like Mario has a canonical origin story or anything like that. They've been intentionally obtuse and loosey-goosey about characters and their story, because inherently Peach is just a damsel in distress archetype. Like, that is the role she plays in almost all media that she's in. Mario is the hero archetype. That's the role he plays in almost all games. And so bogging it down with actual backstory and canon and making them actual characters, I think would be a huge mistake. So yeah, that very possibly is going to be shocking and something that rubs against my nostalgia as far as whatever her origin story is. But I will, just for funsies here, pitch what I suspect the origin story is going to be. If it's in Mario Galaxy, you would think that it is probably something to do with the galaxy and elements in the galaxy, Rosalina, stuff like that. I suspect none of that is true, though. I suspect you're going to have like an after credit scene or a reveal at the end that just says Princess Peach is from Earth and probably from New York, New Jersey. It would be a little crazy for her to be directly related to Mario, like a sister, long lost sister type thing, although that would help them never have to actually have any romance or shipping between Peach and Mario going forward. But then if that was the case, then her being a princess would mean Mario is a prince, and that I think would be fairly dumb. It is possible that she's from an alternate Earth and Mario is not from the real Earth. Thus, she has the small nose and Mario has the giant big nose and is shorter. That is believable too. And then my third guess, just for fun here, again, is if it is a Mario Galaxy and it's going to be some galaxy related thing, then they're going to say that she was created via destiny and some kind of cosmic magic from nothing, and that Rosalina created her for some reason, or somebody else created her for some reason. It is funny, her name is Peach and she wears a pink dress, but the pink dress isn't inherently a peach color. So you could even see her being called Princess Peach and she's from like some kind of fruit planet and she's actually a fruit that evolved. We're gonna go really, really crazy. Of course, that would just be goofing on her name and that'd almost be a joke for sure. Moving on, analysts say the Xbox Game Pass price drop is unsurprising after Call of Duty failed to significantly increase subscriptions. The cut should see subscriber counts grow, they say. It will be Tuesday, happened, I guess, in this announcement. I missed completely. They are dropping the price of Game Pass Ultimate from $29.99 to $22.99 per month, and PC Pass from $16.49 to $13.99. Yeah. Now in this case, the price rises can't really be blamed on tariffs, considering there's no physical media being imported in that case for a monthly subscription fee. But undoubtedly, it is one of the many examples we saw of people raising the prices while the tariffs were going on, and people just raising prices because they knew they could get away with it. Let's see, Koei Tecmo predicts 50% higher profit for the fiscal year of 2026 than originally forecast due to strong game sales and investments. The publisher has greatly revised its forecast for the year. Yep. Well, that's fairly surprising, and I guess maybe Pokemon Pokopia just really outsold more than they expected. Which, in fairness, I wouldn't have been 100% certain that Pokopia would have sold as well as it did. And I assume people are still just really happy with Pokopia, even though I'm not really hearing anybody say anything about it. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a slow grind in which people just start to miss their dailies on Pokepedia and they just get bored with it, and then 3 months, 4 months down the line, you see barely anybody is playing the game. But they will have already had their sales by then, so it doesn't really matter. Let's see. Xbox is cutting Game Pass prices and removing launch date Call of Duty games. Game Pass Ultimate drops from $20.99 to $22.99 per month starting today. So this was the news story I missed. Which, yeah. Do we think that this might be the beginning of an even bigger separation between Call of Duty and Microsoft? I doubt it. It would be a fairly crazy move for Microsoft to sell off Activision, or Call of Duty in particular, to another company. And so I think Microsoft is going to have to stick with its acquisitions for a while. And I don't know who they could really even sell it off to. I don't think Sony would be even particularly interested, and I don't, maybe EA, after it being acquired in part by the Saudi Arabia firm, might be interested in it. And that's probably where this would go if Microsoft was going to sell off Call of Duty or Activision, is that they would sell it to the Saudis, which I wouldn't really put it past Microsoft if they could make a cheap buck selling off Call of Duty. But yeah, I think that would be a dumb play. Call of Duty is a tentpole they have bought. Them getting rid of a tentpole does not make any sense, and it's not really in line with what they've been doing with maintaining tentpoles as far as Halo and Gears of War, well past the point in which they were actually helpful. Here we have a quote. I don't think by any means we nailed it, end quote. Arc Raiders design director says significant changes are coming to the skill tree. Virgil Watkins says juggling player versus player versus player versus event means some of the game skills are underserving their purpose. Honestly, I saw Arc Raiders and I thought Arc Raiders had already been shut down. It has just been so many games with similar names and similar looks to them that, and I know several of them have been shut down and haven't done well. The Mind's Eye Studio staff are now jumping into the fray with legal action, saying the management installed invasive surveillance software, unionized build. A Rocket Boy employees say the software violated their data privacy. Unless they forced the spyware, let's just call it that, instead of saying surveillance software, which it probably was just, some kind of mouse movement monitoring thing or keylogger type thing to see that they were working, or screen capture type thing to see what they're looking at. Unless they forced them to install that software on their own hardware, this is not going to go anywhere. But a union could drag out a lawsuit for a long time and force a settlement and force a change anyways, probably a change for the better. But it has been fairly consistent, to my understanding, in the United States, that if a company owns the hardware, the computer, they give you a laptop, they give you a cell phone, they own it, they can do anything they want with it, they can spy on you all day and all night with it, and they usually put it in the employment contract and terms of use and things like that they are going to do that. And it honestly benefits the company to say, hey, we are spying on you and we are watching you and we do know what you're doing. I heard a story of somebody who got talked to by HR for looking at porn on a corporate computer, and the very next day he looks at porn on the corporate computer and gets fired. So he just couldn't stop himself, or didn't care, didn't listen. But yeah, assume they know everything you're doing on a corporate software. Assume that they know everything you're doing on any kind of corporate servers, including a business email. So obviously you don't want to send personal data and personal emails on your business email. So yeah, like tons of people have been caught as IT is just scanning for HR violations or people flirting with each other on the corporate email servers. And yeah, it's happened over and over again. So yeah, your only real protection is if you walk into your job with your own computer and then they demand you install software, and usually if they're demanding you install software, you probably should just say no. Give me a corporate laptop in that case. There really is a good argument to separating your personal hardware from corporate hardware. But yeah, the lawsuits don't seem to stop around Mind's Eye, and it does just feel like it is definitely feels like it was a hostile work environment and a terrible work environment. The software in question was called TerraMind, which is a terrible name, and they are saying that management is refusing to disclose what data was collected from employees and how the data was stored, as well as the reason for the installation in the first place, which management refusing to answer questions around the union is pretty, to union members, is pretty normal. It says it's using AI, which is the absolute most ridiculous thing you would use AI on. We may very well see that this spyware software, employee monitoring software is what they would probably call it if they were more generous, may come in to play in a lot of other lawsuits too. Because if it collected evidence, then corporations usually have a legal requirement to maintain evidence, which can then be subpoenaed and has to be handed over to the other side of a lawsuit. And that may very well be what this lawsuit is all about, as it is the first step to force Mind's Eye as a company to preserve evidence and not destroy evidence, because if they destroy evidence and a judge finds that you destroyed evidence, he's going to judge against you severely. He's just going to assume 100% guilt, the most guilty possible scenario. So yeah, the absolute worst thing you can do is destroy evidence. The best thing you can do is preserve evidence and hope the other side just doesn't know about the evidence to subpoena it and ask for it, or is just overwhelmed or lazy and doesn't look at the evidence. Or best scenarios, don't commit anything criminal in the first place, and then there's the evidence you show will exonerate you. This is an interesting announcement. A single-player spin-off, Splatoon Raiders, is coming to the Switch 2 this summer. New amiibo for the upcoming game have also been announced. I very much want at some point to be able to play a Splatoon game and not feel like I'm just a completely different second-class citizen, because I don't want to play against a bunch of kids. That being said, I would also have to have a Nintendo Switch, and buying a Nintendo Switch 2 for one game is ridiculously silly. Now, I do have a concern here, in that Splatoon as a game may be trying to move closer to being something closer to Fortnite than it already is. And some other series is going to become the new thing that's like Splatoon. Which would be kind of weird to see like two series swap what their genres are. But we kind of have seen some of that in like some of the Pikmin games and the Kirby games feel a little too similar. The newest Pikmin and Kirby game feel like they're stepping on each other's toes a little bit as far as their theme, even though Kirby plays a little bit differently. And Breath of the Wild certainly is a very different game from what Zelda games are. So it may very well not be that it is a direct swap between two games and their genres, as much as we're just going to see a lot of Nintendo genres, which, let's face it, Splatoon is the newest but very successful Nintendo genre. They may just all be evolving into something else, which is probably a good idea. Really. This does still look like you're playing Splatoon, but perhaps you are playing Splatoon more in the form of like a Dota lane game than in the form of a circular arena that has to be balanced for two teams. It's probably a lot easier to make a single player experience like this too. And it looks like there's just going to be a lot of upgrading your weapons, a lot more taking on waves of enemies. Noticeably in this trailer, we haven't seen them actually squish down into the paint, so it might be that they can't actually do that in the game. I would kind of assume this is going to be a full price spin-off game. It'd be surprising if it was like really short and it wasn't full price, but it's possible. The Squid Kids were always kind of preteen teen characters, and so I could see maybe the thought that they are aging the characters to an older audience. You're certainly starting to see with this amiibo, for instance, just belly and skin, and yeah, there's more implied approaching bikini level clothing, although they're not really anywhere close to that. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the age rating on this is a little higher than what Splatoon feels like normally. Yeah, I would say Splatoon even now is pretty much fairly evolved from what it originally was. And we might see that they're doing this spin-off in particular as a reaction to Fortnite itself just being on Switch 2. I think it's on the Switch 2 now. If it isn't now, it's very possibly going to be on the Switch 2 by the time this comes out. Let's see. Here we have a headline that frankly doesn't surprise me. It says, Bethesda doesn't have the engineering know-how to remaster Fallout New Vegas, a former Obsidian chief creative officer says. Chris Avellone claims Bethesda doesn't have the source code and has no idea how to reassemble it. Well, it would have been a very weird contract if they weren't entitled to the source code at the end of the project being done. And if the source code is in any kind of reasonable compiler, reassembling it wouldn't be that hard. I suppose at a certain level, this is brings up a very valid question as to if you were going to remaster Fallout New Vegas, would you really even like that, or do you want a full-on remake of Fallout New Vegas in the new engine, in the newest version of the Gamebryo engine, at the very least? And I think that would be fairly easy to do. Like, it would take a lot of work, but a remake in Fallout New Vegas in the new engine from just people's experiences would be as good as trying to remaster it. And certainly these days, there are ways to remaster a game even if you don't have the source code by just injecting in newer textures. So if Microsoft wanted it done, it would happen. If ZeniMax wanted it done, it would happen. If Bethesda wanted it done, it would happen. But none of those really want it done, it seems. Maybe the new Xbox head has a different opinion. And this really, I think, is just more, frankly, sour grapes by Obsidian, in that they rightfully are just not getting the credit that they deserve for making the best of the reboot series of Fallout games. Yeah, there's a rumored Fallout 3 remaster that they're assuming will use the Gamebryo engine that was originally in Fallout 3 with a Unreal Engine on top of it to enhance the visuals. That is probably what you would do with Fallout New Vegas. But yeah, this is another one of those interviews that's not really telling you anything. Maybe we'll see a remake or remaster of Fallout New Vegas, maybe we won't. Probably remasters, knowing the way they've been going. But we won't know until it actually gets announced and actually gets released. And frankly, I think most people would rather just a new Fallout game be made versus remastering Fallout New Vegas. I mean, I relatively recently, in the past year, played Fallout New Vegas for the first time. There's nothing wrong with the game as it is. And nothing that a remaster is really going to improve in the game by that much. The bigger issues I have with Fallout New Vegas are not the visuals, it's kind of the lack of things to do. There's just considerably fewer interesting settlements and caves and just interactions in Fallout New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas is, particularly if you're not doing the DLC stuff, very centered around Kaiser Caesar and the Mr. House and Vegas Strip and the New California Republic. And so yeah, if you're not super interested in those three groups, there's very little left in Fallout New Vegas to pay attention to and be excited by. Let's see. Moving on, the Mass Effect TV show writer denies reports it's being rewritten to accommodate non-players. The Fast and the Furious writer Daniel Casey says it isn't true. what's probably most shocking in that headline is that there was a writer for Fast and Furious 9, because wouldn't it just be take the previous Fast and Furious movies and do it all over again? I'm joking here somewhat, but yeah. You inherently have a problem with the idea of a Mass Effect TV show in the first place, since there's very personal experiences that people had with Mass Effect, and each person's experience is going to be a little bit different. But yeah, I also could very well believe that while this is being denied, it actually is being done. We really have yet to see any case of a video game to TV series actually be really faithful to the video game. And that doesn't inherently mean they all failed, and it doesn't inherently mean they all succeeded. There are definitely examples of, like, the Witcher Netflix series not being faithful to the game and people being upset about that. But then the Fallout TV series more recently is not really faithful to any of the Fallout games. It doesn't really feel like a video game, and it's been hugely popular and successful. And honestly, I think that probably is your better bet, is to not try and make a TV series feel like a video game and rewrite it a little bit to accommodate non-gamers. Not that there are that many non-gamers that would watch a Mass Effect series. Inherently for Mass Effect, you're making a sci-fi TV series, so you need to target that sci-fi TV fandom audience, which is already your exclusive focus that you should focus on. And so if it comes out and it doesn't feel quite like the game, fine, get the sci-fi TV audience on board, though. But yeah, I imagine also a significant number of sci-fi TV fans, I assume those still exist, played the game or play games, though. It's kind of crazy to say non-gamers at all in modern times, because everybody pretty much has played at least one game. And most people are fairly consistent in playing games of some sort. That old argument of gamers versus non-gamers has long since disappeared. Non-gamers are people in dementia wards or babies at this point. Let's see. The Japanese giant entertainment Toei is forming its own gaming division. Kamen Rider and Power Rangers owner will first make games using its original IP. Well, Toei, do they actually own Power Rangers? Guess they do. I knew they owned Super Sentai, of which Power Rangers was derived from, but I didn't know that they actually owned Power Rangers themselves. And yeah, Kamen Rider, I don't think Westerners would recognize at all. I'm not sure it's even particularly popular amongst Japanese people. Godzilla, I think, is Toei, but I might be wrong about that. There's no telling what kind of games they're going to make. They could be small little mobile games, or they could be giant quadruple A games. Although they did stop making episodes for Super Sentai, and thus I assume probably stopped making episodes for Power Rangers too. So there is, I guess, a question as far as what they would really be pushing and trying to promote as far as games that they were making. Oh, I also saw that there was a trailer for Mortal Kombat 2 live action movie, so it's crazy. We've got like Mortal Kombat 2 the movie, we've got Mario Galaxy the movie. I think both of those probably coming out in this year. Street Fighter the movie, probably possibly coming out this year. So there's like 3 video game related movies coming out this year, at least. Which is quite a lot, really. Yeah, of course, I wouldn't inherently bet that the Mario movie is going to compare in any way to the flops of what I assume Street Fighter will be, and very possibly Mortal Kombat 2 could be a flop, although maybe it will be a mediocre success. I don't expect it. Sorry, I'm trying to move dishes around here as far as reaching my next glass of water. There we go. Again, out of sorts here. I don't think that is the way of the future, though. I really just don't think it makes sense that we're going to have 3 or 4 video game movies every year, and at least a couple of them are going to be good and worth watching. But yeah, this may just be an example of Hollywood's last gasps of trying to bring people to the theaters and maintain relevance. But it still very much feels like a lot of people involved in the production of these video game movies are sometimes not really enthusiastic about it or loyal to it in any way, and they just are doing bad jobs on them. Although, in fairness, it's pretty hard to make a Mortal Kombat movie and make it make sense. It's pretty hard to make a Street Fighter movie and make it make sense. That's probably true for any kind of sci-fi or video game. It would make a lot more sense if they were making movies around things like It Takes Two or Split Fiction. Yeah, those things were basically designed to be movies in the first place. And yeah, like Hellblade's Susuna's Sacrifice, basically a movie, so yeah. I guess that is one avenue that if I was in charge of Xbox, I would definitely start to pursue a lot more. It's kind of crazy how many things Sony has and how bad they've done with their connections as far as Sony Pictures making movies. And notably, the Uncharted movie, which was made a while ago, was a flop, and I saw that the Blu-ray was on sale for like $5, and I'm like, even at $5 for a Blu-ray of a movie I don't want to watch again, that isn't worth it. But you know, there has been a huge failure on Sony's part with their direct connection to Sony Pictures, where Microsoft has no direct connection to any kind of movie production company, which makes very little sense too. At the very least, Microsoft should be partnering with Amazon more to make more video game movies and get some of those actually in theaters. Which is an interesting thought if the Fallout Prime TV series was taken to theaters for like a week, where you could just watch the entirety of season 1 in theaters before season 2 came out. That would have been an interesting gimmick. Of course, that would have been quite a marathon too. You would have had to have had the episodes airing over potentially an entire Saturday, if not Saturday and Sunday. Let's see, moving on, we're almost done with the Video Games Chronicle articles, although I am moving very slow today. PlayStation has started telling UK and Ireland players to verify their age by June to keep certain features. Age verification will be required for online communication, Sony says. It might be one of the few things that I kind of agree with age verification as a concept. it's not being implemented in a way I agree with, certainly, but you know, it's not the worst idea to say, hey, you have to be at least 13 years old to communicate, or maybe they're all already going all the way to 18 years old. I believe the UK also just implemented a lifelong ban on smoking for people born before a certain age too, so draconian rulings in general tend to be pretty common in the UK. It is definitely not the land of freedom like the United States, or the land of chaos, if you want to describe it that way. Stay tuned, quote unquote. It sounds like the cult Nintendo 64 shooter Buck Bumble is really coming back. Organized Games teases upcoming news. So this is a tease for an announcement. Yeah, 420 happened. Not that that really means anything for people who aren't smoking weed or celebrating Hitler's birthday. I do not recognize this game, Buck Bumble. So if it is actually a cult game, it's pretty cult, because I definitely don't recognize it at all. Alright, well, that would bring us to the Gamatsu news, but I'm going to take a bathroom break first, so I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So let's go through the Gamatsu news now. Let's see. Cupid Parasite is coming to PC in 2026. It's already available for Switch. I'd have to assume it's not much of an otome visual novel, but it might be. It is weird, certainly to me, to see one come from the Switch to PC. But, yeah, normally visual novels, I would say, go the other direction. Also, Hypnos launches in early access for PC on May 6th, which I see here. It's a first-person adventure and exploration game set in a Lovecraftian megastructure fever dream, which that sounds like a lot there. Have I seen this trailer before? I don't recognize it. And a lot of visual effects being put over the trailer. I may have seen a game like this, but also a lot of video games kind of look like that. And I've had this pain in my teeth / gums for several days now, and yeah, I am done with buying corned beef. It just has too much stringy bits in it. It gets stuck in the middle of my teeth. I cannot get rid of this pain. There might be something stuck in my teeth, or there might not be, and I've definitely tried to floss it out multiple times, not made any progress. Yeah, I am one of many, I imagine, of the people in the United States who, because dental is separate from healthcare completely, was never given the opportunity to get braces when I was young, and would have definitely benefited from that at that point, because I have a few teeth that are crammed too close to each other, and a lot of teeth that are actually pretty far apart from each other, and one that's kind of twisted and has a sharp edge to it. Probably should be filed down. Hypnos is already on the fall list. Cupid Paradise is English only. Interesting. So yeah, you're going a weird direction there. Certainly to see a otome visual novel going from the Switch to the PC, and also only supporting English, which makes me wonder what's going on there. It is Idea Factory, or Idea Factory International, so what I suspect may have been the case is that this game was released on some kind of PC version in Japanese under a Japanese name, possibly not on Steam. Possibly this is a censored version of what that would be, too. We don't know that for sure, but it might be the new gimmick. And frankly, that wouldn't be a terrible gimmick to implement, to have Western releases have a different name and a completely different page from Eastern releases. Yeah, there's just been too many people that, like Kotaku and IGN in the past, that have tried to attack Eastern games, not inherently visual novels, but just Japanese games in general. And if you are vulnerable to those kinds of attacks, then and pushes for censorship, just isolating your games to your audience might make a lot of sense there. It is segregation, and I wish it wasn't the case, but it's, if the choice is that Japanese visual novel developers and Japanese lewd game developers need to segregate their listings versus getting their listings completely censored or completely banned, then segregation, I guess, has to be the solution for a while. Of course, that's not going to be good enough, and the likes of Visa and MasterCard are still going to push for outright debanking and deplatforming of any game they don't like. Let's see, Detopia launches July 14th. PC demo is now available. Again, I feel like I saw a trailer for this a long time ago. And yeah, the announcement trailers compared to when games actually come out still seem to be too far apart, particularly for small games. Like, I think for medium-sized and small games, you basically should announce your game and then release it within a month at most afterwards, and not do the big, I'm going to announce this a year before or 6 months before, or I'm going to announce this at a video game award show, because it's just going to be too forgettable. Only giant memorable games like Fable Remake kind of make sense to have those big trailers, and even then they take way too long to actually launch. Let's see, the Blood of the Dawnwalker Road to Launch event is set for April 28th. I assume this is the vampire game. One of the vampire games. This came out July 14th and has no reviews at all. So yeah, I can give it a little bit more time, but not much more. The Expanse Osiris Reborn closed beta is now available. I would assume there's still probably a decent number of fans of The Expanse. The Expanse as a series probably would also benefit from just a big remake that got it in front of more people's faces. That is perhaps the one argument for the remake of the Harry Potter TV series, is that if it were the case that nobody saw the Harry Potter movies, remaking it might make some sense. Or if there was some reason why the Harry Potter movies, the old ones, are not worth watching. But that's not really the case for the Harry Potter movies, and it's not really the case for The Expanse either. So yeah. Only remakes of really terrible games or really terrible movies or TV shows would make sense. You could also remake things where the actors are just way too old or dead. That also would make some sense. If they remade the Clue movie, for instance, with new actors, just almost shot-for-shot remake, that wouldn't be the worst thought ever. And they could do some different endings around it. They'd probably want to change the jokes and put new jokes in it, and that would be weird. But I would be up for a new Clue movie. We're going to get a whole bunch of ensemble cast actors. Maybe you throw The Rock in as Mr. Body, as far as here's somebody who you wouldn't normally expect to die, and he dies early. And it would be very funny if The Rock, in his giant muscly state, was the person that was murdered. And then maybe you get some of the Saturday Night Live alums in there, recent ones. That one, Andy, could possibly be a funny butler character. Yeah, that might work. Yeah, I kind of feel like if you're going to remake the Clue movie, and I know I'm just rambling here, all of them being like stand-up comedians instead of actors almost makes sense, but it probably wouldn't be performed particularly well. So it'd probably be more comedic actors, but you could get it done. You could throw in like even a Paris Hilton as Miss Scarlet, and I could see how that might work fairly well. Anyways, yeah, Dawn of the Bloodwalker is the vampire game. Yeah, these screenshots really aren't showing me quite enough about the game. And Expanse game looks like this. I didn't manage to actually sit through the Expanse TV show, so I would be really hard pressed to evaluate a game like this if I was going to play it. Let's see, R-Type DX Music Encore is launched April 30th. Reimagine music while playing R-Type. Yeah, I'm shocked by how many R-Type re-releases and things like that have been made. I've never actually played R-Type. Don't think I would actually make it to the end if I did try to play it. It is an interesting idea to take old games and just modify the music, not really modify the visuals. It's a thought, at least. Is that one that we already had it on the fall list? Yes. Bubsy 4D demo is now available for consoles. Bubsy is another game where I just don't know if it ever was really that popular of a series. But it's an interesting thought, to say the least, as far as bringing back these mid-tier and low-tier game series. It's already on the fall list. I need to maintain momentum here or this is going to take forever. Echo the Dolphin Complete was announced. Jalopy, or Gallipoli? Galopia? Gallipoli? Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that. I think it's a location. It launches May 21st. It's a World War I themed first-person shooter, which I would assume this is the Battle of Gallipoli in the UK. Not involving United States people. It looks like Australian people were involved in it more. Anybody who would have been part of the Empire. That's an interesting point here. I'm not a huge fan of military games, but I'm going to put it on the fall list anyways. We may be hitting a point where there is either just a natural saturation and lack of interest in U.S. military actions in World War I and World War II games with U.S. soldiers, but we also might just be at a case where there is enough political conflict and dislike of the United States at the moment that all of a sudden we're going to start to see more war games starring non-US people, which, yeah, that would be certainly interesting. I don't know if they're going to sell. I don't know if war games in general are going to sell. But if all of a sudden we stop seeing the US military particularly paying for inclusion and promotion of them in military games, or US military servicemen being a target audience for gamers, that would be interesting. the US military, I think, is still probably a large audience for playing video games. I don't know if they particularly play a lot of military video games per se, though, or if they aren't playing more of the sci-fi shooter type games. I do think they probably are overwhelmingly gamer bros that would be playing things like Halo and things like that, but yeah, anything that is World War I and World War II may not be their interest. And maybe that assumption in my mind is wrong nowadays, and their gaming tastes have evolved. Control Ultimate Edition is now available for iPad and iPhone. Interesting. I doubt you'd really want to play it on those devices, though. That seems like that would be a fairly poor experience for a game that was pushing visuals quite a bit in 2020, nearly 6 years ago. Well, over 6 years ago. Console Arcade's Ninja Gaiden 3, The Ancient Ship of Doom, launches April 23rd. But yeah, that Ninja Gaiden looks very different from the most recent Ninja Gaiden games. Fu Ryu teases a new project called Project Alice to be announced on April 25th. And then the subheadlines here is Cry Me Light. Here we just see an upside down eyeball, it looks like, crying, which tells us basically nothing. There is a thought, though, that it might be recently trademarked Cry Me Light, since they published Cry Star and Cry Machina, or Machina. As one thing about EA potentially being bought by the Saudis is that the American McGee's Alice game might get something done to it. Probably not, though, if I was to guess. And yeah, nobody else is going to make an Alice in Wonderland game, and that's probably deserving. Alice in Wonderland as a concept for a video game doesn't do anything particularly too special. And yeah, if you were going to make a new series based off of classic literature, I think there's other books you might want to dive in for surreal worlds, or just create your own game loosely based off of Alice in Wonderland. Alien Rogue Incursion Evolved Edition Part 1 is now available for Switch 2 and coming to the PS4. That is crazy that it's a parted out game. And I don't know what kind of game it even is, that it would need to be a Part 1. I think that really just tells me that the game is probably early access and not being labeled on Steam, at least, as early access. Overall, this is 74%, but more recently it's down to 69%. 12 people played it in the last 24 hours. It's single player only, so that doesn't usually matter too much, but kind of feels like the game maybe has been abandoning it. Yeah. Missions constantly take you to the same place for some stupid reason. You should have to go back to an area where you've completed missions before. Unsatisfying combat experience. Underneath constant backtracking, stupid difficulty, and a bad save system. So yeah, it seems like there's just core problems with what the experience is. The fact that you're advertising your game as made for Aliens fans doesn't really mean much. Alien fans, the first movie. Which in the first movie, that is where you see the least of the alien xenomorphs. You see like one xenomorph in Alien, the first movie. It is the worst movie to potentially make a video game from, even if it is the best movie in the series, which I think most people would agree upon. So it would be better if they said for Aliens fans. Yeah. I don't think I'd ever actually get into the Alien series myself, but I'll leave it on the wish list. It's not been a good series as far as video games go. And yeah, the type of movies they are just don't really make sense that it would ever be a good experience as a video game, because you're changing the inherent nature of how the movies are supposed to be, and that aliens are supposed to be this existential, dreadful danger that you can barely survive, into a video game where you're going to just have a gun, more than likely, and be able to shoot multiple aliens by the end. Let's see, the Backworld demo is now available. It's a story-rich horror RPG. Interesting animation style for what is, I think, supposed to be the back rooms. Honestly, this is looking more like a Pokemon game than anything. Kind of feels too like the a more colorful take on Undertale. And then they throw in a backrooms dungeon section where you're being chased by monsters. Which I don't know if that really improves what I saw up until that point in any way. Just kind of feels like they mixed two games into one, as it were. Let's see, Be Crowned launches this fall. It's a psychological survival horror game. A trailer for this? I don't think I've seen this. Yeah, it's really amazing how even like a tiny little piece of food stuck in my teeth is super annoying. Like all I'm doing is just rubbing my tongue raw, trying to find that piece, trying to get it out. So we're seeing a horror game. Perhaps with some low polygonness to the enemies, the models, although that attractive lady seemed to be given quite a bit of care in her animation. I don't know if lewd in video games ever works particularly well. I mean, lewd in horror in particular, I don't know if that works particularly well. It works fine in video games in general. But yeah, if you have any kind of like romance scene in a horror movie, you pretty much know it's going to end horrifically. And you're already fairly certain from that. So the only thing I could think you'd do is you'd have like a lewd scene as like the very first scene in a horror game when people aren't really expecting anything to happen. But if you know it's a horror game going in, people still are probably expecting things to happen. This looks like this might be an interesting game. I say that about a lot of games though. It's kind of a default meh response. Twinkle's Galactic Tour Wildest Dream trailer is available. This looks weird. Do I need to watch a trailer on it? Though. I don't think so. Inherently that is the thing that makes these streams go too long, is I'm just watching trailers on every single game. And because the trailers aren't just automatically playing and popping up, which would be a lot of programming for me to get them to do that. I am usually reading the headline, scrolling down, hitting play, and then sitting there for an extra minute or two while the trailer plays. A dark fantasy first-person action-adventure game, Hollow Blade, is going to be published by Top Hat Studios. This is an interesting thumbnail art style, but I suspect when you actually get into the game, it's going to look completely different. Yeah. It would be a lot of work to make it so that whenever you clicked on a tab, these trailers would be found, brought to the top of this page, and immediately start play. And it still doesn't really solve the issue of sitting here and doing nothing like I am now. There's just nothing else I can do while this is playing. So yeah, this looks like a lower polygon, lower resolution Dark Souls type game. Nothing particularly impressive there. Yeah, totally different art style from the thumbnail. Well Dwellers demo launches April 23rd. Okay. Let's see, Hollow Blade. And the back world. At least they're not calling it the back rooms like so many other games have been called the back rooms already. And at least it's not just exactly the same kind of back rooms asset flip game we've seen hundreds of times on Steam. The 2D pixel art horror action game called Metamorphosis is going to be published by Top Hat Studios. I would assume this isn't based off of the Asian, I think, book called Metamorphosis. Of course, I might be confusing this, and I might be thinking of a hentai called Metamorphosis. Yeah. But yeah, the philosophical Metamorphosis book, if such a thing exists, is what I'm thinking of in my mind. Yeah, there are several philosophical books not in the English language and not easily translated and may never have been translated to English. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of visuals, some of which are kind of horrific. It is somewhat inconsistent in its theming, it looks like, too. Looks like it might be a platforming game, but it might also just be a super difficult platforming game at this, at what I saw there, based on what I saw there. I always have ambitions to want to play a game like this, but often don't get around to doing it. The idea of a Metroidvania game where you mutate horrifically and evolve hasn't been done too many times. Maybe it's been done once or twice before. But yeah, if that was the way this played out, that would be in tone with Metamorphosis as a concept. And then Motor Slice launches May 5th. This was an interesting looking game, although it would certainly do better if it had a little bit more polish to it and had a little bit more variety in the trailer. I think the general idea of running around with a chainsaw and attacking robots, it's not terrible, but there is just a decent amount of what looks like monotone platforms and sides that make the background look too boring. I'm not sure if the parkour wall running stuff really is ever going to be that exciting. We are seeing more variety in this trailer, and it does just kind of feel like you probably will be on the ground in big arena areas fighting giant machines quite often. So it might just be that you are stuck in an area where it's just always dangerous. This is a Metroidvania game also. Yeah, we are going to have, I think, quite a few Metroidvania games, although this one is not actually labeled as a Metroidvania game. And this is kind of a great example of where visuals and video can be fairly different. The cel-shaded aerial roguelite action game Delivery Must Complete is going to be published by Top Hat Studios. Okay. I'll hit play on that one. The idea of increasing your capabilities in a roguelite for an aerial combat game does have a interesting aspect to it, certainly, and that you could very well be super overpowered. And it gives me the thought that your aerial combat is going to be fighting in arenas or on rails most of the time. It is an interesting question as far as how would you transition from one area to another. It does seem like it's just moving really fast in the trailer. But yeah, maybe I could learn to handle that. Again, this is a great example of where seeing it in video form gives you that feeling of speed, where the screenshots are just static and you're not going to get any of that speed feeling. It definitely feels like it's a fairly small game, though, Motor Slice. It might very well be that you start at the bottom of this one facility and you have to just work your way up to the top. And it may be that you can't actually defeat any of these robots at all, and so if you fall down, you're just having to do a fight sequence to get on top of them and past them. Yeah. This could be a lot of different things. Definitely feels like Top Hat Studio is publishing quite a few games at the same time, or announcing games at the same time. One would assume that they will be published slightly apart from each other, not cannibalize their chances of success from each other. We talked about Game Pass Ultimate and PC Game Pass removing Call of Duty at launch and dropping the price. Drill Core is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch on April 28th alongside the DLC The Machine World. Let's see if I saw Drill Core before. I did, but it wasn't a game that interested me apparently, and it still doesn't look like a game that interests me. Again, recently it's down to 62% overall, it's at 84%, so there's something recent that people are not happy about. Let's see if we can find it out. The more new things they implement, they take a turn away from what I liked about the game. I like strategy planning, making choices, but the changes just gave stress elements and semi-hidden difficulties. I want much more meta upgrades so I can farm and grow stronger, and more planning rather than stress and random luck. The game mechanics break down in later worlds, not increased difficulty but faulty gameplay. Save your money. Interesting. I guess that's something we probably should see reviews like that more often, where people say, hey, when you get into the back half of a game, maybe it's not so good. Whereas most games, I think, get reviewed by people who didn't make it to the back half of the game. That's why there is definitely an argument to, in your own mind, reject a lot of positive reviews for games that come out on day one or in the first week, particularly if the game is the type of game that is going to take more than a week to beat. Because you can pretty well tell that those players have a high chance of not actually having made it to the credits. And playtime helps you a little bit there, but not a ton, considering it's very easy to pause a game and then walk away from it and get your playtime to ridiculous numbers. And there's a big difference between adding even 12 hours of playtime by pausing the game and walking away from it versus actually playing 12 hours of a game. Let's see, Clockwork Ambrosia launches May 12th. It's a steampunk Metroidvania game. Interesting, although it doesn't seem to be consistently steampunk in that this is a sci-fi blaster exclusively, and this is just a revolver from what I can tell. I'm not seeing any steampunk elements in either of these guns, and while she has goggles on her head, there's no real steampunk technology in her outfit. So this might very well be a case of the lightest form of steampunk anything we've ever seen. Yeah, the backgrounds definitely are not screaming steampunk either. No. So that might just be a bad labeling and a bad way to advertise this game. Ignoring that, the idea of two guns where you're swapping around might give an interesting twist to your challenge, and modifying your guns might be an interesting twist. But could also just be fairly annoying. If anything, this feels like they're putting a twist on something like a Mega Man game more than a Metroidvania game. We'll put it on the fall list and keep an eye on it. But yeah, steampunk is not actually mentioned in the headline here or as one of the main tags. So that might very well just be Gamatsu using the phrase incorrectly. There really haven't been a ton of actual steampunk games released or ever made. Probably because making something video gamey and steampunky doesn't really change too much at the end of the day. Splatoon Raiders launches July 23rd. Splat scores of enemies and hunt for treasures. Is that a verb they use? Splat? Maybe it is. Let's see. Penguin Colony adds a Switch 2 version and is going to be published by Fellow Traveler, due out in 2026. I have no idea what I'm looking at here. It seems like this is a male head, this is probably a female head, and then there's some kind of weird mask thing that they're wearing, from what I can tell. I can't make it out. And the actual screenshots of this game seem to be watching penguins or playing as a penguin. Penguin Colony. Again, I just don't know what that screenshot is all about. Gonna jump just into the middle of this trailer and see what it looks like you're doing. Yeah, it seems like you're playing as a penguin going through maybe a kind of crazy, surreal world. Maybe with some kind of Cthulhu-like elements. Definitely feels like this could be a more artsy-fartsy game than we normally see. Nier series 15th anniversary trailer, the first unveiled at the Nier 15th anniversary exhibition in August of 2025. So this is basically a trailer that was already viewable if you had gone to Tokyo to see it in 2025, but wouldn't have been viewable anywhere else. It is definitely something that feels like a stall for real announcements of anything new in the Nier series. Which also, let's just face it, that a 15-year anniversary now for games doesn't really mean that much, considering how games could easily take 5 years on average to come out, and a lot of games are getting like sequels 10 years later. So yeah, particularly if you're dismissing unplayable and pointless spin-offs of the Nier series that were mobile games, it is really just Nier and Nier Automata, and then the remake of the first Nier game, which replaced basically the first Nier game. But yeah, like Reincarnation, I think, is one of those mobile games that may not even be out yet, but it's going to be a mobile game, so it's not going to really be particularly too relevant. And it's interesting you're seeing what look like actual humans in this game. Yeah, the girl there is kind of a great example of a girl who would at least poke the bear and tempt people like Kotaku to complain about a character being depicted in a certain way compared to Pragmata, where I don't think that really is happening. Live action playing musical here being a big thing too. Yeah, Nier Automata in particular also painted them in a fairly unique corner in that I don't think anybody wants any new Nier games that don't have 2B in them, or a character that is very similar to 2B both in appearance and in, I imagine, some personality, but mostly in lewdness and appearance. And I don't think the first Nier game was quite like that, and so the success is almost certainly going to push them into bringing back 2B and or a character like 2B. We saw that with the Atelier Ryza series of games too, and that main protagonist from Atelier Ryza was definitely popular enough that they made 3 games in that series, and then when they started to make other Atelier games that weren't Ryza games and didn't have that female protagonist, interest started to erode. Ratatan Physical Edition pre-orders are now available. Leave it at that. Ratatan is rated very positively overall on Steam. Toei Company establishes Toei Games. First games are going to be announced on April 24th. So we don't actually have to wait that long, I suppose is the good news there. But if everything is important, which you'd imagine everything is important, Toei Games doing these 8-bit pixely animations probably does speak to what we can expect from them to publish. And since they are new to the market, it would be kind of crazy to expect them to be making quadruple A games right out of the gate. But yeah, Toei probably is big enough that they could have acquired or partnered with a company if they so chose. And again, if Microsoft was smart, they would be making all kinds of deals with Toei games to try to do something more in Japan and be more popular in Japan. And it would be an easy way to gain fandom, certainly, to say Microsoft wants to invest in Toei games and is funding the development of Toei games, whatever they may be. Super Robot Wars Y DLC expansion packed Infinite Darkness launches April 22nd. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Super Robot Wars Y is very positive on Steam. Again, you have to be a Gundam type robot fan, I imagine, for Super Robots. Fans of Super Robot genre to really want to play a game like this and be able to actually recognize a lot of these characters in Super Robots. Yeah. And yeah, I don't, off the top of my head, remember what the difference between a mobile suit and a super robot is, if there is any difference versus a robot. Gundam specifically would be Gundams of the Gundam series. Yeah. Moving on, Sanrio Party Land has been announced for the Switch 1 and 2. We've had quite a few Sanrio games come out back to back. And Roger has been replaced by my text replacing script to ampersand Roger. Is coming to the Switch 2, iOS, and Android on June 18th. So yeah, the headline originally here would have been AMD, but my text replacer replaces the word AMD with ampersand, so it takes up less space. This is an extremely rare case in which that is wrong, but in fairness, I never considered the thought that a game would start AMD. I could probably program it so it wouldn't do that, but it's not worth doing it that way. Dial Loop is coming to the Switch on June 17th. Doesn't look like a particularly interesting game. Here we can see And Roger is an overwhelmingly popular visual novel, which I guess at a certain point I have to just say mob rule. I was wrong to not have this on the fall list, and I will correct it by putting it on the wish list. I certainly can see why I would have overlooked a game like this, as the screenshots definitely don't look particularly interesting, so it must have just a really great story. Dial Loop is also positive. That being said, it still does not look like something I'd want to play. Let's see, Shikondo Blue Pieta debut trailer is now available. Do we want to watch this trailer? Let's just jump in the middle and see what kind of game it is. Side-scrolling bullet hell game. That was not what I was expecting it to be. Though I really didn't know what it would be, but I was assuming JRPG. Yeah, I would be really hard-pressed to want to play a side-scrolling bullet hell game. Side-scrolling shooter? Small possibility I'd play. Bullet hell makes it questionable. It says it's perfectly tuned for widescreens, but then what it does to adjust for widescreens is just put some extra banner or heart on the sides. I wouldn't inherently call that perfectly tuned. Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced reveal showcase is set for April 23rd. So yeah, we'll have some big news basically tomorrow, so Friday we might have some big news, and that brings us to the Gaming on Linux articles. 11-Bit Studios are totally remaking This War of Mine. This was a game that was talked about a lot. I'm not sure how popular it really was amongst gamers versus possibly just getting awards and playing and like video game journals talking about it. But certainly if they're just going to totally remake it, that gives me a second opportunity to potentially play the game, and maybe the visuals will be a little bit better, although I don't know if the visuals were particularly bad. It would be interesting if this complete reimagining of the War Mine is a completely different style of gameplay mechanic, which, yeah, that creates an interesting scenario about potentially playing the original game or parts of the original game to compare it to how the reimagining plays, and that doubles the amount of time you might spend in the game, which, yeah, I don't think everybody or too many people would really do that, but some people might do that. Transport Fever 3 takes modding to a new level with a curated mods program. So I assume this isn't going to the level of actually selling mods. But it does seem like they're saying they're gonna pick and choose some winners as far as mods and promote them. Which, I mean, a curation is generally just the opinion of somebody, so it's not that big of a deal as long as they're not banning mods, other mods. And I doubt for a game like Transport Fever there's too many offensive mods that you even would ban. But yeah, you never know. The game isn't out yet, so them talking about mods might be a bit of a red flag. And they should just be talking about the content that they themselves are planning on putting in the game. Vampire Survivors, the deck builder spin-off of Vampire Crawlers, is out now. And we saw it was doing well. The tower defense meets roguelike progression in Infamous Keepers from the Legend of Keepers developer. Let's watch this. See what kind of thing this is. Now, generally, I would say I'm not a huge fan of tower defense mechanics ever, but in this case, it might work. When I was playing Dungeon Keeper 1 and 2 many years ago, you would build up your dungeon and you'd have a lot of time, and then at some point you would cross over the timer, or you would dig too far in some direction, and that would have the enemy start to attack you. And then usually when you defeated the wave of the enemy, that was the end of that level, which could be, and many times, somewhat disappointing, because you might be developing a really nice dungeon and then all of a sudden you just win and there's no reason to keep on playing. So just a constant barrage of enemies coming might keep you in the same one dungeon you're developing the whole time. There is a lot of Dungeon Keeper vibes here. It doesn't feel like you're really missing too much from Dungeon Keeper and what is here. The only thing I'd imagine you might miss here is Horny, the giant red horn demon that looks like Darkness from the movie Legend, and the Dominatrix from Dungeon Keeper 2 character. I don't even know what the name of that character was, since that wasn't a single character. There were multiple copies of it. Let's see. Kaz is a dopamine-fueled action roguelike that's a full workout for your fingers. So I assume you're hitting. Well, if it was KAZ, that would not be a QWERTY keyboard layout. Yeah, if that's the way this is laid out, if this was QWERTY, this would be the up and the down and the left and the right arrow keys. Let's watch this in movement so we get a general idea of what. So it feels like it's kind of a time-based Sokoban game where you're actively trying to hit the creepy clowns, and it seems like you're just failing if you can't do it in a certain amount of time. It doesn't feel like there's a huge reward for doing it in an efficient way. In a lot of ways it feels like it's almost an idle game. or a gacha game where you're just constantly playing there. Yeah, I don't know if there's enough of a game there to really interest me. I'll put it on the follow list, but it's pretty unimpressive. Sure, the visuals are better than the average type of game you'd see like this, but that gameplay mechanic is not particularly impressive. Gaming Online says I'm going to spend far too much time playing Orc Incremental. Here we have a elf lady, it looks like, and maybe an orc character. And let's see, is this a Survivors-like game? It does feel a little reminiscent of a Warcraft meets Survivors type game, or maybe even a lane game. I guess it feels like the idea is you're just building up larger and larger armies. And I guess the elf girl is your enemy, which does hit on an interesting move there, certainly, in that the elf girl as your enemy might be the character you see more often than the orc character, which I don't think too many people are going to be super excited by that. Although it seems like you're really just going to be looking at troops most of the time. So it's kind of like a mobile tower defense game where you're just moving and pushing the tower inward. Could be something. Could be nothing. Maybe the elf girl actually works on your side. It does certainly also hit on the thought of they needed some visual attractiveness to counter the orc character, which, let's face it, doesn't look that attractive. Live out your witchy dreams in the open world adventure Witchspire in June. Okay. This one's already on the follow list. We'll see how it goes when it comes out in early access. Let's see. Mozilla is using the Claude Mythos AI preview to help fix major security issues in Firefox. Sounds like a bad plan, but heck, if somehow AI can find actual vulnerabilities and patch them correctly, then that is at least a somewhat good use of AI there. Inherently, if humans were told that AI would mean you have better chances of survival during a heart surgery transplant or something, then by all means use AI. But I think Claude Mythos in particular might be centered around the idea of finding security vulnerabilities, which, if it's like any other large language module, it might very well be just finding old articles and reports of security vulnerabilities and possibly patches and solutions to old security vulnerabilities that Firefox, Mozilla would simply have not had enough staff to find those articles and implement those improvements. Hopefully this doesn't mean Firefox all of a sudden becomes bloated, inefficient, running terribly, or it's full of a whole bunch of buggy code that causes it to crash, or it's full of a whole bunch of insecure code that is pretending to be secure code, considering how I do use Firefox and do not want to change from Firefox to any Chromium-based browser. But yeah, Mozilla clearly trying to go down the AI path, and I don't think that's really the best path in most cases. Let's see. Australia has targeted Steam, Roblox, and others in a new legal push against extremists and predators. interesting. I assume this is child sexual predators they're talking about, which I would say Roblox almost certainly is way more guilty of allowing that type of activity on their platform than Minecraft or Steam. Whereas Minecraft barely has any kind of global chat or anything like that. I don't think it really does. I don't think there's a launcher way to friend people and chat if you're not in the same world. And then Steam games in general have chat and all of that, but I don't think there's any one example in Steam where they're actively doing anything to really support predators. I don't know what more they could really do to prevent predators too. It is an interesting question. Does Steam scan every single message sent to you? Is it listening to every single voice conversation happening in chat? It's very possible it is. It's very possible they've already told you they were doing that in the terms and condition. Beyond that, I don't know what more they could really do. And Australia has always been extremely conservative and over demanding and censorship prone, so we may just very well see Steam say no chat features, no social communication features at all for anybody in Australia if this push goes forward. Moving on, the Proton Experimental has been upgraded to Proton 11 for better Linux gaming compatibility. We can see there's a long list of games here that they have improved upon. You've seen most of these changes though in the experimental update patch notes, so I don't think there's actually anything new to talk about. The Framework Laptop 13 Pro has been revealed with major changes and great Linux support. One of the major changes is upgradable RAM in its packaging, low profile RAM, which this format of RAM probably is going to be like the future, is that we're going to start to see these low profile RAM packages, very possibly with only one stick as a concept, being put in and trying to be put a lot closer to the CPU, which I assume the CPU is right here with the RAM close to it. It's available in 3 main configurations, all of which seem to be Intel CPUs, not AMD CPUs, though, to match with the upgradable RAM. They also have an experimental one where you could put just an external graphics card connector and use a desktop graphics card instead of a gaming graphics card. Which, yeah, maybe the gaming graphics card is under the fan, or maybe it's just right next to the CPU. New screen, I think, has been upgraded quite a bit and is an actual touch screen. A wireless touchpad to match their existing touchpad. I wasn't particularly too interested in hearing these updates for the framework hardware. We are still very much in a wait and see pattern, but it would be very hard to think that the framework laptop would really be a competitor to a Steam machine if you wanted specifically to focus on gaming, and the prices probably are going to be about the same as a Steam machine. Framework laptop is what I would recommend. The 13 Pro probably at this point would be what I would recommend if you absolutely need a laptop. But that's only if you absolutely need a laptop. If you just want a portable thing that you can do a light browsing on and play games, then the Steam Deck still kind of makes more sense than a gaming laptop. And if you want to do hardcore PC stuff, you obviously need a much more powerful PC, which, yeah, that one mini ITX style desktop PC that Framework made has not really knocked people's socks off. Yeah, it is nice to see upgradable, repairable components from the Framework laptop, and that is a nice feature and all, but it's really hard to recommend a laptop to anybody at all. Let's see, the Colorado age attestation bill, is that a word? Gets amendments that could have open source excluded. Carl Ritchie, the founder and CEO of System 76, has given an update on the upcoming Colorado age attestation bill that's seen some amendments. So yeah, the laws potentially, if they even get passed, could be very different from what they originally sound like. It does make a decent sense to say open source operating systems and apps are excluded, code repos being excluded, and containers are excluded, considering all of those are so incredibly modifiable. It would be pretty ridiculous to have a law trying to prevent people from modding out age tests and age verification things added to open source operating systems like Linux. And that's the big problem there in a nutshell, is that even if the main distros do have it, there's going to be very easily tutorials on how to remove that component and get rid of it. And even if Windows, a closed source operating system, had age verification, I imagine you'll start to see cracked versions of Windows where it's been stripped out and removed too. There is no overestimating how far people annoyed by age verification will go, and kids will go, to circumvent these kinds of laws. Of course, a lot of people just lie, and that'll be the easiest way to circumvent it, unless they have a really good verification system. Let's see. If you're streaming or recording on Linux, check out the audio management tool Pipeweaver. Pipeweaver is a free and open source audio management tool for Linux built on top of Pipewire, designed specifically with streaming and broadcasting in mind. Right, well, that is something I might personally need to look at later on. So I'm going to open this tab and hold on to it for later. Cooler Control 4.2 adds auto detection for new devices, stress testing, and more. This is another thing that you might need to install as far as GPU and CPU fan controls, although inherently, if you're building a new computer, you might just want it to have the default values and never change it. So it's not a terrible thought to just not install these kinds of applications if you're installing Linux, and just assume everything is going to work the way it's intended to work without tweaking and underclocking or overclocking, cooling or underclocking and overclocking RAM or CPU. But yeah, when building a computer, I definitely recommend build it stock, try it out for stock. If the fan turns out to be really noisy, then after a while change settings. If it runs terribly, you probably built it wrong unless you just have a really old hardware you're building with. But overclock if it really needs to be overclocked, and that includes automatic overclocking, disabling that in the BIOS, which a lot of motherboards and BIOSes just automatically overclock, and that includes even XMP if you can avoid it and have a good experience without turning on XMP, although that's going to severely be different compared to what type of RAM you're using, whether XMP is necessary or not. Moving on, the Pokemon-like Monster Catcher Monster Crown Sin Eater arrives April 30th. Got it on the fall list. The Total Chaotic Sticker / Ball arrives May 4th, and you have to play it. Let's look at its Steam page. Yeah, I don't see anything here that really interests me. But I have it on the fall list anyways. Blending histories with fiction, the World War I narrative adventure The Caribou Trail arrives May 14th. Weird that you have like two different World War games. One I think was World War I, one is World War II, advertised and putting out announcements so close to each other. This one, though, I think is more of a cinematic horror experience, I think, than just a military first-person shooter type game. Let's see. Sort out the devil's mail in this spooky-looking game called The Mail Room, which will look at the screenshots and not particularly impressed by these random visuals, but maybe there's something here. Maybe it's a more puzzle game than I think it is. Seems like it is probably more of a puzzle game. And then the Lenovo Legion Go S has seen a massive price jump, which, yeah, I wasn't recommending the Lenovo Legion Go S to start with. It was launched around at $829 with the Steam OS version, which already sounds ridiculously expensive, with the Z1 Extreme processor, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and 1 terabyte of SSD. Now it's listed on Best Buy for an eye-watering $1,579.99. The official Lenovo website doesn't list it at all, and they're saying it's temporarily unavailable. So really, this is probably just Best Buy raising the price to a ridiculous amount. But yeah, not really surprising we're seeing shortages on handheld devices. In a funny way, it may very well be the case that the Steam Deck came in at a very opportune time to kill any possible handheld gaming for a year or two, any competition there, and that has just built up enough of a buffer now that the Steam machine can come in and kill handheld gaming some more when it comes out. Handheld gaming never has really been particularly successful. You either get really cheap devices that can run like Super NES style ROMs, or you get incredibly overpriced PCs being squished into handheld form factors that don't make any sense and are still running Windows. Handheld gaming Windows type devices have been available and come out extremely frequently in the past, but none of them had any kind of hyper relevancy around them until the Steam Deck and SteamOS changed things. And yeah, this really points to a factor too, that there's not really a good reason why Valve would put a lot of effort to releasing SteamOS for other handheld devices, even though they said they've committed to that. Like, it really doesn't benefit them too much to put too much effort into that. And I imagine SteamOS will just eventually get released for anything, and they'll just make a proper installer for it before they actually come out with a special collection of handheld devices that they want to push it on. I like the Legion Go S, although they did do it for the Legion Go S. I imagine Valve very much enjoys having only 2 or 3 hardware setups and configurations to have to focus on. And then they'll probably just open source an installer to install SteamOS on other hardware, and it will just be buyer beware. And it will probably be a case where some builds just don't work. Very possibly if you built a new computer with like the newest NVIDIA graphics card and possibly a Intel CPU, the newest Intel CPU, that SteamOS will just have real problems with that. Also very possibly if you have Marvel like Wi-Fi chips, on your motherboard, those too might have proprietary drivers that make SteamOS work poorly or not work at all. So far we haven't heard any pushback as far as age verification for SteamOS, but in fairness, you already have age verification on SteamOS to a certain extent, because you have to log into a Steam account as you're setting up a Steam Deck. So, and I assume you're going to have to log into a Steam account as you're setting up a Steam machine. So the logging into a Steam account will mean they already know how old you claim to be, more than likely. And yeah, if these laws go through and you do start to have these kind of age verification things, SteamOS is going to do basically nothing with the age unless you go and try and buy a game. I doubt there's going to be any preventing of going to desktop mode if you're under a certain age. I doubt there's going to be any integration of age verification to desktop mode to prevent you from going and launching any kind of other app or going online to any kind of website. Alright, well that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Yeah, I feel out of sorts today, but also I feel like this is not too bad. I'm not like super energetic and super hyped, but I'm also not feeling exhausted and dragging down, which maybe that is just the thing that I should learn here, is that maybe I do need to just take an extra week off once a month and just recoup and literally stay in bed and watch streaming of all of Supernatural or something. I'm not going to watch Supernatural all over again, but something that long. Yeah, I certainly need to get back to watching Ranma 1/2. I stopped after a couple of weeks of watching that when I first started, so I'm like only into season 2 of, I think, 7 seasons in some movies. Anyways, that's not have anything to do with video games. Nintendo is being sued by customers seeking tariff refunds. Two consumer based in the United States claim the Switch maker has unjustly benefited from tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. Yep, they probably want to turn it into a class action suit. There are rarely good lawyers, and very often there are bad lawyers that suck up the majority of the funds that you get from class actions. And there's a lot of people that hate class actions in the United States, but also there's a lot of people that have been disenfranchised and would never actually engage with a lawsuit. So class actions can actually be very helpful for poor and small people, busy people in general. Inherently, it would be better, though, instead of the two consumers bringing in action to the court and then turning it into a class action. It would be better if there was just a government agency that brought an action against Nintendo and sued on behalf of the citizens of the United States, and if they won the lawsuit, would then automatically just pay out the money, all of the money, to the victims. That's kind of a great example of where the government is not really serving its citizens and could serve its citizens better. But even when you do have the FCC or the FTC actually sue a company and actually win, they usually never end up sending any checks or anything to the people who are actually affected. Let's see, moving on, the Dead by Daylight studio Behavior Interactive confirms layoffs. The company indicated members of its external development team have been let go. Yep, we are continuing to see layoffs. Not as often as we were earlier in the year, but still nothing really has changed in the economy, and particularly the bubble, I think, is bursting around game companies, in particular in their massive hiring sprees that they've done in the past, on top of everybody chasing AI and using AI as a way of doing layoffs. Although really, I think particularly in gaming, the layoffs are being done so that they can meet certain goals during their quarterly meetings and look like they're more profitable than they really are, because it is very hard, if not impossible, to quantify how much of value of a company you're losing when you lay someone off. But in an artistic endeavor like gaming, you're probably losing a decent amount of value of the company, because the company itself can't go on to make new good games if they've laid off all the talented employees and only kept the middle management and the upper management, probably only the upper management, around. There's a report that Ubisoft has canceled a social sim game, Altera. It was an Animal Crossing inspired game, was reportedly in development for nearly 3 years at Ubisoft Montreal. Believable, certainly, this report is, considering how Ubisoft seems to be just shuttering itself in hopes of selling itself to the spin-off company or Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund in particular. Let's see. Here we have a quote. A scope document is not your plan. Laying the groundwork for indie success. This might be an interesting article to read if you ever think about developing a game. Although most of these articles and speeches that you can hear can only be so informative and can only really be so applicable to your project and your plan. But yeah, I'm not in any way against the idea of having a whole bunch of post-it notes as far as here are ideas, here are different tiers of ideas, here's what we absolutely want in the game, here's what would be nice to add to the game, here's what absolutely we could only add if we were getting extra publisher funding. Yeah, setting a scope and trying your very best to prevent feature creep when developing is a good idea of many things you probably need to do for any kind of programming. But what your actual plan is as far as how you're going to do things versus a list of what things are going to be in a game, those are somewhat separate things. Let's see. Windrose has surpassed 1 million sales within a week. This feels like this really is just a sleeper hit coming out of nowhere. Xbox is slashing the price of Game Pass and losing Call of Duty games at launch. Then the union workers have taken legal action against Build a Rocket Boy over alleged privacy violations. They might actually be in a state that has some specific privacy laws that protect workers further. I didn't really think about that when I was talking about this before. But yeah, there might be some extra protections that aren't just U.S. federal protections, which there's basically none, that gives them more of a reason to sue. But they may very well just be suing for discovery or for a settlement. And then Sony has rolled out age verification for the PlayStation users in UK and Ireland. We talked about that before. Alright, and that brings us to all the new games on Steam, so let's go through this. Basically, I'm going to be looking at games. If they interest me a little, I'll put them on the follow list. If they don't interest me at all, I will swipe down and close the tab. If they look like they deserve a YouTube short, I will swipe to the right and leave them open. See, in this one, I'm being very generous by putting it on the follow list, as it is just an up game where you're just constantly going up, but you're playing as a basketball, so there might actually be somewhat interesting physics there, but I imagine it would just be really annoying physics. This is kind of a great example of where I have to assume all of this is pre-made assets just being flipped into a game, because there is a real visual distinction as far as one thing looking really different from another. This dice game feels like it's using AI. Yep. Here's about the most minimalistic description. Some images and musics. Which I assume means all images and musics they could get away with. I haven't gotten back to the point where I'm going to just start closing tabs of games that use AI. Looks like this might be more multiplayer focused, but I'll give it a chance. I like the art style here, so that sells me a little bit more on this. This one's already on the follow list. We'll see what happens here. I saw a recent video talking about most banned video games, and it's a UK based video, so they're more talking about things that were banned in the UK, a couple games in Germany, several games in Australia, and it's a listicle website that all they do is really just do lists. And like one of the first games they covered was Rule of Rose, and I did not know that that was banned anywhere. Might certainly explain why Rule of Rose has never been like re-released. But also Rule of Rose is a pretty weird horror game. So yeah, it certainly is in the category of plenty of other weird horror games that haven't been remade or re-released. We probably are at a point where at least a re-release of Rule of Rose is justified. It makes it would be a much harder argument, I think, to say Rule of Rose should be remastered or remade. And like, weirdly, the list didn't include any GTA games, so I'm not sure any of those actually were ever banned. Manhunt, as they are, it definitely does make some sense that they wouldn't re-release or remake those. You could probably remake Manhunt. Pretty much any old game that at one time was banned is going to pale in comparison to what have gone on since and not been banned. Yeah, Night Trap was banned in the United States, and there's a whole re-release of that. Of course, in that case, that's another example of a game where actually playing it is not really worth your time. This is interesting. You don't get those kind of art pictures, like Asian art in video games. Very rarely do you see something like that. So yeah, in the most recent release of Night Trap, they have just like a video mode, which I probably should just play it that way. It does make some sense to just watch the video. Of course, in the case of Night Trap, it's one of several games where you're jumping between different cameras. So I don't know if there is a real great way to see all the footage from one camera. And if you're not interacting with the game, it's only going to show you the videos of what would happen if you didn't interact, which is usually a losing scenario or neutral scenario. So the actual video mode has to basically just show you a let's play of what somebody who is playing the game perfectly would do. I never played Night Trap when I was younger, but I did play a game called Double Switch, which is part of my long backlog of games I do want to cover at some point. And in Double Switch, it is basically the same idea. You're controlling traps in a hotel and following and looking at a camera, different camera feeds for different rooms. It definitely felt like when those live action full motion video games were being made, they were early CD-ROM games that could hold the video footage. That's why it was now capable to use live action. But it definitely felt like that was a potential way in which video games were going to go, is that we were just going to have theater troupes of actors, not Hollywood actors probably, but just like decent actors but not great actors, doing footage for video games, and that the video games would be fairly minimal. But yeah, I think the gameplay mechanics weren't that interesting, and I don't think it was particularly cheap to make those types of games, and they didn't sell well enough. And even if you compare something like Double Switch versus something like Mad Dog McCree, it's probably easier to program something like Mad Dog McCree, where it's live action footage, but you're shooting a light gun or you're shooting the mouse at somebody. Instead of arming traps and disarming traps, and yeah. Double Switch probably takes the idea of arming traps and disarming traps to its full completion as far as what you can do there. There's a point where you're supposed to arm traps and can't arm traps too much because you will overload the circuit breaker, and when you get to a certain point, they'll unlock new traps. So it starts you off simplistically. Then somewhere around the middle point, you start to disarm traps because you're trying to actually protect people from getting captured. So yeah, I don't know what more you could have really done with that concept, and if you drug it out. This game I already own and it's being updated. But yeah, if you were going to drag it out too long, it would have gotten fairly annoying. Night Trap is, I think, was originally a 3 CD game with 3 different acts, and pretty long for the experience, particularly since it's the type of game you have to do in one sitting. And that is another thing, is yeah, Double Switch, Night Trap. There's not really a way to break up the game at any point and stop that constant timer that is playing in the background. And yeah, they checkpointed you a little bit, but not to great levels. And those games are very much different experiences from what you would have seen from other games of the time and what you see of games now. Is this some kind of not in English or in Spanish game? Focusing on dyslexia. Yeah. I'll put this on the follow list and see if anybody reviews it, but you just never know. Apparently in Spanish, dog is dog, but it also says light and broom, so maybe this is just an English version. Yeah, they're showing it. There's an English version, and then there's most of these screenshots are in Spanish. Yeah. Imagine we won't be too far away from the end, and again, we'll just call it a day. We'll have to jump into watching Invincible, I think, fairly quickly here. I'm not expecting too much from it, though. I'm just gonna catch up on it. Heck, maybe I'll get ambitious enough and do something else today. Something actually productive. One of the things I've been trying to do is use more electricity in my house, and honestly, I cannot find a way to use more electricity in the house without running the air conditioner and freezing myself out. I have a weird electrical plan that if I spend enough electricity, I'll get a $100 credit, so if I can spend just about 1 megawatt a month, I will theoretically benefit from using all that electricity while not actually paying as much as normally I would. But yeah, that requires that each day of the month, basically, I need to use 33 kilowatts, and I'm using about 20 kilowatts. And so either if I plugged in my servers and actually started working on them or just let them run, I might be able to do that much. If I left all the lights on in my house, it might help a little bit, but yeah. I have made a house that's so energy efficient that actually trying to use the energy falls apart. I could plug in my second refrigerator, and that would probably put me over, but also I'm not using it, so that would wear down the refrigerator, not really be worth it. Inherently, I still have a problem in that I have too big of a house and too big of a electrical plan for the number of people living in the house, and if I just brought in some roommates, that would probably solve the problem quite a bit. Yeah. Just doing laundry more often and washing dishes more often would probably put it over. And certainly plugging in the servers would help somewhat there too. Maybe I will make that more of a priority before the next month's bill. It's just to plug in the servers, even if I'm not gonna actually work on them and try to get them running for the first time correctly. Yeah, I've been waiting for years for TrueNAS basically to get good enough to use it. Anyways, that's going to be it for the show. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.